In this session, we'll implement a return value for one of our methods. So here's my class stuff with its 5 members, the 3 properties, the 2 methods. One of the methods is the constructor, and the other one is this double stuff method. Notice what I've done this time is I've called out that the double stuff method returns a number. Okay? So here's our constructor initializing those values, and then here is the double stuff method implementation, the definition of it, where we double the value of property C, and then you'll notice on the end node here I've added the fact that it returns property C to wherever it called from. So whenever a method is called or invoked, it has the opportunity to return a single value back to where it came from. Okay, and then in our model we're saying that we new up a thing2 object, we call thing2's double stuff method. I'm not doing anything with the return value there, and then I call double stuff again a second time, but this time I assign the return value of that to a variable called how much. Okay. So let's see in our code then. So here is the constructor. There's our properties. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Here is our class stuff. Here are the properties. Here is the constructor method. And then here is our double stuff method. And you'll notice that this time I have added in brackets before double stuff a type, like double. Okay. And that is the return type. That's how we specify the return type. Again, in UML, we usually say an identifier or a name colon its type. In a lot of programming languages, that gets flipped around. And so we say the type space the name. Okay. The other thing here I'll point out is the fact that in UML, I just say it's a number. I don't really care usually. I'll leave that up to the implementer as to whether it should be a single or a double or an int or whatever kind of thing on that. The implementer should be able to figure that out if my model is well designed. And I'm using double here because it's kind of a catch-all. Okay, I think I've said this before, but ints can be doubles, but doubles can't be ints necessarily. If I say it's a double, then I'm saying it's a floating point value, which can't be an integer. However, integers can be considered floating point values without a fractional part. So, okay. Then you'll see down here that I'm newing up thing2. I'm calling thing2 double stuff, but without bothering it with to do anything with the return value, and that's actually okay. I can ignore it. But then down on my next statement, my last statement here, I'm saying, okay, call double stuff again, but this time use the return value, assign it to a variable called how much. Okay, so let me copy that, come over to my editor, paste that in here. I'll just go ahead and save it. I'll bring up my CLI and say, hey, PowerShell, take a look at it. And PowerShell comes back and says, 84. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute, is that right? Where did the 84 come from? You may have actually stumbled across this. If you were playing around, you should have probably stumbled across this with from the last session. But what we find is that 84 came from doubling stuff. I mean, we could logically reason this out and say, okay, when we newed up thing2, it was initialized, property C was initialized to 42. We called double stuff. That should have doubled it to 84. And then we called double stuff again, which should double it to 168. So the 84 must have been between the time it was newed up and the time that double stuff was called for the second time. That's right here. Okay? And what we find is, this is just something PowerShell is doing. It's saying, hey, the result of that statement, calling the double stuff method, actually has a return value. So let me print it out for you. Notice there's no right host. I didn't put any right host in here or anything. This is PowerShell. I'm not crazy about the behavior myself, but it's just kind of blurting out, speaking out of turn, saying, oh, yeah, 84. But notice when we actually did something with the return value, it didn't shout it out by default. Okay, so what I will do then is I'll come in here and I'll say, okay, let's actually tell it, hey, why don't you write to the host, to the machine I'm on, the value of, let's see, $sign thing to member property C. Okay, now I'll save that and I will run it again. And so now we see the 84 and the 168 from the final value. And then we can say, well, okay, I really didn't want it to print out the value of double stuff all by itself. So what we can do, and to prove a point, is I'll say, oh, $junk is assigned double value. Now if I save that and run it, I see only the 168. So because I said it was going to return a value, it did return a value, and if PowerShell saw a return value, it's going to spit it out if I don't do anything with it. If I do something with it, like assigning it to a variable, then it doesn't print it out. Okay, let's see. I think I'm good with that. Play with that, and let's see if there's anything over here in the explicit. Oh yes, I know what we should do. We should come over here and say, we should come over here in my editor, yes, and say, what happens if we don't tell it what to return? Okay. So I'm going to take that type out of there now, save that, and run this, and we get an error. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have given you a chance to place your bets as to what was going to happen. But notice, we see an error message at the file, the line number, we're used to all that kind of thing. Return this member property C, all that is underlined with tildes there, and it's saying invalid return statement within void method. So because I did not specify a type here, it says you're not telling me what to return. I'm not going to return anything, void being that type of nothing. And it's saying, oh, there's a void method here, but you are actually trying to return something. And so I could say, well, what if I actually said it's a void return type? So I save that, I try it again, and I'm going to get the same error message because void, again, is a type of nothing. It's a nothingness. It's something that represents nothing. And so if I say, hey, you're going to return nothing, then don't try to return something. That's conflicting. So if I take the return statement out, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to type a sharp sign. Hash mark, pound sign, whatever you want to call that symbol. Dozen different names for it. But in PowerShell, that is a comment character. That tells the translator to ignore the rest of the line. And remember, PowerShell is line oriented by default, unless we have the semicolons there. So this says, hey, ignore the rest of this physical line there. So I will run that, and now it works fine. I guess if you wanted, I could prove that by saying, let me just delete it all together, boom, run it again. Yes, it's fine either way. I will Control-Z undo that. I'm going to put that return statement back in then and say, I am returning something, so therefore I'm going to have to give it a valid type. And so I'm going to say, oh, let's return a Boolean. And I try to run it, and it looked like it worked. Why did that work? Does that mean I can put any type in here? I can say string and run that? Sure appears to be. What if I said, well, if I can put any type in here, what if it returns a stuff type of thing? Like that. Okay, now it broke. So what we see is PowerShell will promote some types to others. It thinks it it will treat some types as promoted to others. Basically, those strings, numbers, booleans that it knows about natively, but certainly not something we make up. And we'll talk about casting and promotions another time, but I wanted you to see this, that you might get some things that seem conflicting that sort of work. It's not magic, but don't rely on that because it will break. In fact, what we see here is it cannot convert 84 value to a system int 32. No, it can't convert the 84, the literal, quotes, literal value of 84 to a system that is of the type system int 32, a 32-bit integer. It can't convert that to a stuff. So apparently it was able to convert the other things, but it can't convert to a stuff. Yeah, like I said, we'll see more of that as we go on. But basically, if we say we're going to return something, we should return it. If we try to return something, we better say we're going to return it and say what type it is. And so I'm going to put this back to double and say it works.